Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tiltmoney. And honestly, the draft is over, so I have no idea why he's still here, but we have Kendall Mirsky in the building. You can find him on Twitter at Mirsky Kendall. Obviously, I joke. We're going to get to our poll question from yesterday in a moment to show you guys exactly why he is here. But together we are the Bills, guys. This is the Air Raid Hour presented by the Cover One Sports Network. And we made it, gentlemen. We made it. We survived. I think we have 1 week off until the NFL schedule release next Thursday before we have to get, down to business again. So today is a day to sort of relax, decompress, and reflect on the draft that was. So I had a poll question on Twitter last night. I said, after everything was all said and done, after the 2022 NFL draft came to an end, you saw our coverage for weeks and weeks and weeks. I said, who do you think would be best fit to run an NFL front office? And I put this poll on Twitter. And I said, me, Tilt, or Kendall. And the results were an overwhelming victory for Kendall Mirsky with 49%. Tilt comes in with 30%. And I have no idea how this happened. I only got 23%. I feel
I honestly thought it should have been closer.
I feel disrespected. I feel a little hurt. I think that one of the people in the comment section, I think, made the best comment because my vote was for Tilt. I voted for Tilt. And here's why. And I kind of agree with the person in the comment section. The person in the comments, and I didn't write their name down. I feel bad now, but he put, Judge is the kind of guy who would stand up on the table and, pound the table for a prospect.
Yes. All three are important.
Kendall is the one who would grind the film, and I think Dave is the level head to put that all together and make the final decision. Me, I'd be drafting like Bill Belichick, taking Tyquan Thornton in the second round. So, plus, I'd play a role of just slotting the draft board. I told you guys that Tyquan Thornton was going to go in the second round. So,
I think that when our collective heads are together one day, once Kendall gets in his cushy GM job and he brings us along.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'd hope I'd win this poll. I'm literally I've been working towards this for 5 years since figuring out what I want to do sophomore year of college. So I'd hope I'd win this poll considering, that's what I'm working towards, but it is what it is.
I wonder if you're the first person ever. You said sophomore year of college or high school?
College.
I think you're the first person.
I didn't figure out if I wanted to focus baseball or football until sophomore year of college.
You might be the first person ever under the age of 21 to set their career goal at being an NFL general manager. So,
well, it's a pipe dream, but you got to dream big. And then, when you don't reach it, you still get somewhere that you're content with.
If Trent Baalke can be an NFL GM, anyone can be an NFL GM.
You hate that.
We got TJ coming in with a super chat. Really appreciate it. It's a $17, $17 for Josh Allen, I believe. I love that those are coming in $17 increments for Josh Allen. That's super awesome. If you guys ever wanted to do a super chat for Marcel Darius, that might also be something you consider. But I kid. We appreciate all the super chats here. TJ coming in saying appreciate you guys. All the coverage and entertainment you bring is amazing. Go Bills. Yeah, that was it was just so much fun on Thursday and Friday, and I can't wait. It was my wife's birthday on Saturday. So I was, with her, I was with the in-laws, I was with their family. They're all football fans. So we were watching the draft and I was checking in on the coverage and I'm like, oh gosh, next year. I was shaking because I didn't have my spreadsheets in front of me. So I can't wait to be a part of the Saturday coverage next year when it doesn't happen to fall on my wife's birthday. So, my wife wasn't too happy about that. She looked at me. She was like, you realize it's my birthday. And I'm like, yeah. And you realize I'm making the sacrifice, right? I am here with your family.
It's a two-way street.
I'm away from my spreadsheet. So I'm making the sacrifice because I love you. And then next year I don't have to make that sacrifice because it's not your birthday. So we all win.
I was lucky. I had a little bit of a window when the baby was napping on Saturday and before we had plans with our family too. I was able to hop on with Anthony and Kev for about an hour, literally minutes before the Bills traded up for Shakir. I had to go, so it was I was on basically till the end of the almost end of the fourth round, and then of course we had been talking about this would be a great spot for them to trade up. Maybe with the Giants, they have 2 picks right there at the beginning of the 5th, and they end up trading up with the Bears. But still pretty cool for that to see that play out. So
Yeah, it was really one of my favorite things this weekend was watching who the Giants picked, knowing that's also who was on the Buffalo Bills board.
Wandale Robinson. Yeah, there were.
I think Wandale might have been the pick if he was still there on the board as early as the second round. I mean,
do wonder.
Very similar player to a guy like James Cook, especially the way they like Brandon Bean kind of downplayed all of the draft picks, and we'll get more into this when we talk about each pick. He really downplayed like every prospect. Like he made James Cook sound like his roster spot wasn't secure. So yeah, he'll come in, he'll compete with Duke. He'll be, he'll be a change of pace. Like it was just he very much downplayed every single prospect. So I'm sure that there's probably a much bigger role planned, especially for a guy like James Cook. All right, so now that the draft is over, I want to do two things before we start getting and diving into the picks. We're going to go pick by pick. We're going to give our brief thoughts. Obviously, if you were here on, Thursday and Friday, you got our pretty in-depth thoughts on Kaiir.
Those were more reactionary.
So we've had some time to digest. And then we're going to get into the later day picks because we weren't really around on Saturday except for Dave for a little bit. And we will get into some UDFAs as well. There are some intriguing UDFA names that I want to go to. All the offensive linemen intrigued the hell out of me. And I don't know if you guys saw Tanner Owen from Northwest Missouri State.
That's the one I haven't looked into.
So all I've noted is that Damon Talbot, Draft Diamonds. If you don't follow him, he's amazing. He was tipping all the picks for me on Saturday. I was in front of the TV. But my father-in-law likes to pause the television during live events. It drives me nuts. But he's my father-in-law, so I don't say anything.
Right, of course.
So I was getting my tips picked by Draft Diamond. So I want to appreciate that. But he posted a video of Tanner Owen running wide receiver routes at his pro day at like 6'5", 300 pounds. And he was, if he ever makes the roster, he's going to catch a touchdown from Josh Allen. I can almost guarantee you that one. But I want to do a little bit of a reflection. So the first question I have for you guys is, what was your biggest takeaway from the 2022 NFL draft? It can be Bill specific. It can be NFL specific in general. But Dave, I'm going to start with you. Like, what was your biggest takeaway from this 2022 NFL draft?
Biggest takeaway for me, honestly, the AFC, I thought overall drafted really well, which is obviously not great for the Bills. Not saying the Bills didn't draft well, but like the AFC, every time I turn around, there's a player we liked getting picked, whether it was the Jets, Chiefs, Ravens, Colts, like really good drafting from a lot of the AFC teams. I do think a couple of the NFC teams did have good drafts as well. The Seahawks, the Lions, I thought did well. But some of the powerhouses, right, in the AFC continue to stack really top talent. And so when I was looking at, the draft and thinking about the Jets and how good they drafted, I was like, okay, well, they still have a gap, right? They still got to prove some things. But then you think about teams like the Chiefs and the Ravens and even like teams like the Colts, who are like not a playoff team last year, but like they added some nice pieces. And now with Matt Ryan, we'll see. But like the Chargers as well, like the AFC really, in my mind, drafted well. And I feel like the Bills were like, they had to draft well just to kind of not keep up, but to just make sure they kind of stayed as far ahead as they were. And now, obviously, the big story going into this year is going to be like how the AFC East kind of catches up to them. But maybe an even bigger story come playoff time is going to be when these powerhouses meet again, potentially for the third year in a row in the playoffs, the Bills and Chiefs. How is that going to look? Chiefs adding some really nice players that we were firmly invested in, Trent McDuffie, Sky Moore. Leo Chanel, like they drafted some guys that we were kind of honed in on. So
yeah,
one of my biggest takeaways was almost like, the rich get richer here in this draft in the AFC. And so obviously grades and all that are kind of reactionary, but if you look at it from the standpoint, I saw some people making this good point on social media today. If you look at grades and you want to make grades from the standpoint of like, do you feel like teams address their needs, adequately and address their needs from a value standpoint where they should have, where the slots aligned in the draft, then I think the Chiefs did a great job. So that to me was probably my biggest takeaway. The AFC really shone, I thought, in this draft.
Kendall, how about you? What was your biggest takeaway?
I'm not going to keep it really Bills centric at all with this one, because I feel like obviously we're gonna get into everything Bills in this show, but on a grander scale, the depth of this class, how much COVID affected this class and pushed talent into this class at every level. Obviously, I think we can all agree, and most draft pundits can agree, that the top end might not have been as heavy with blue chippers, but the entire draft had talent, guys that had possible shots to make a roster, and even further so, guys that crept into undrafted free agent range. You know, there were a lot of guys that I was hoping the Bills could get, and obviously it's tough for the Bills to get them with the roster they currently have. But Brandon Beane went so far as to say in one of his pressers, I almost hoped we had a couple extra 7th round picks, because he felt like there were guys more than just Baylon Spector that could make this roster in the 7th round. Obviously, it's an outside shot, but they had a shot nonetheless, enough so for Brandon Beane to even mention that he would have wished that he had a couple more darts to throw at that dartboard. So I think the depth of this class really did show. There were plenty of UDFAs that I was shocked made it to that status and was hoping the Bills would get.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's just every year the magnitude of how much we don't know is sort of revealed on draft day. Obviously, the Kaiir Elam stuff, we'll get to it when we talk about Kaiir Elam from the combine. Like, if we had seen that video before the draft, I think there are a lot more people who would have had Kaiir Elam on their first round draft board for the Buffalo Bills, knowing his physical traits compared to just the way that he approaches, with the way he approached the draft process and the way he approaches his craft as a cornerback. And we'll dig deeper into that. But I mean, we're probably privy to like 1/4 of the actual pre-draft conversations that the Buffalo Bills have with these players. I mean, Khalil Shakir said he had been in conversations throughout the entire draft process. It was Benford who said he came on a top 30 visit that we didn't even know about. Zachary Carter, who didn't even get drafted by the Bills, said he thought he was going to be drafted by the Bills, and that was like a Quentin Jefferson type of 3-tech defensive tackle that we never even talked about really on this show. Even Terrel Bernard, had workouts and stuff with the Buffalo Bills, and that never really leaked out. So, when I did my mock draft, I literally just mock draft all top 30 visits for the Buffalo Bills. And I'm like, I'll probably like hit on 2 of these, I'll probably hit on 2 of these 7 and look good. I don't think I hit on any of them. I'd have to go back and double check my actual mock draft. I don't think I hit on any of them. But it still, goes to show we did draft a lot of guys that we have top 30 visits on. And I think this draft really goes and shows and illustrates how important this pre-draft process is for the Buffalo Bills. It's not just traits. It's not just 40 times. It's not just combines. It's the way these dudes are wired. And that's something that we're never really going to be privy to as sort of these outside, prognosticators. I know someone on Thursday was saying we use that word too much, but I'm going to use it again. As these sort of outside prognosticators, we're really not privy to that information. So that's just something that I found really interesting. It's just how little we think we know things and how little we actually know things, and how wild was that draft. So the next question I have for you guys is like, what can we take away from this draft entering 2023? Reflect on it. How can we make our coverage better next year? How can we approach the draft better next year in order to try to better educate ourselves? The one thing I'm going to try to do next year is I'm really going to try to go away from labeling guys with rounds. I tried so hard this year to just label ranges instead of rounds. And even this year, I was still too strict with it. I mean, you see guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, John Mechie, Josh Pascal, Fedarian Mathis, Alontae Taylor, Tyquan Thornton, Cam Jurgens. All these guys are going in like the 2nd round that I think a lot of us maybe had like 3rd, 4th, 5th round grades on. And then vice versa. There were plenty of guys who went in the 4th and the 5th round that we thought were going to go on day 2. And then you mentioned it, like Donovan West was a UDFA at the end of this thing. Like what? Like absolutely insane. Some of the guys, like Justin Ross, makes sense. The medicals,
sure, but and maybe there was that for Donovan West, and we still just don't know.
And we still don't know. But like some of the players that reached the UDFA status is absolutely crazy. So still got to try to wrap my head around exactly how to, go about trying to like frame our shows next year and try to make sure that like we aren't surprised when guys go in these certain rounds and stuff like that. So that's one thing that I have sort of reflected on. Dave, how about you? What's one thing you reflected on for our coverage next year?
I'm gonna do that, and I'm probably not going to. You guys know me. I'm very risk averse when it comes to most things. I don't go out on a limb too often. I try to keep it very. I do try to keep it very like level headed and even keel. But I'm gonna really try next year to not worry so much about things like consensus and rankings, and I'm really just gonna put
Stick to your gut.
my own stamp on what I feel about the
Yeah,
players. And
I like that.
if it's not how it turns out, great. If it is, that's great too. But the fact of the matter is all these people doing mock drafts, all these so-called draft experts, like they're not right. Like we did our mock draft that we did on the Monday before the show was as accurate as pretty much anybody's that came out before the draft. I posted on Twitter. We had like 9 players right to the right teams, 9 slots right, 15 positions right. I think the best I saw from at least the graphics I saw was 10, right? So, I mean, what we did, I'll put it up against anybody from that standpoint, but I'm also going to, me personally, try not to worry so much about like, oh, well, this guy was number 1 for most people. Like, I kind of started going that way with Rachaad White this year. I was like, he was my RB3, and like, no, like people are gonna kill me for that, right? Like for me, it was Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Rachaad White. That was my top 3, and
he went before Spiller.
He went before Spiller. I mean, he went before Brian Robinson, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like,
right.
why worry so much about what other people's rankings are? Just like in a way, I feel like doing my own thought process, like, and sticking to it and not getting swayed too much was my thought process was sound, but I need to follow it through and stick to it more.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you. And the pick that hits that home for me the most is Terrel Bernard. I remember like when the process first started and we were sort of like frameworking these shows, I left Terrel Bernard off the list of like guys that we were gonna focus on. And the reason why I did that was because I looked at his size and I said, well, the Bills need an Edmonds replacement. They don't need a Milano replacement. And that really stinks too, because it's when they drafted him, it stung so bad. Because if anyone listened to sort of the Twitter spaces and sort of the podcast that I do during the regular season with Randy Hardman, where we talk every week about college football and prospects to keep an eye on, I think I mentioned Terrell Bernard, Jalen Petrie, and that Baylor defense on at least 10 straight shows over the course of the college football season. So I talked about him so much during those shows, and then the draft process came along, and I looked at the Buffalo Bills' needs, and I was like, nope, I'm not even going to talk about him. I'm not even going to put him on this like sort of framework of players that we're going to talk about. And lo and behold, the Buffalo Bills go and draft him. So keeping certain players on the board, even if it doesn't look like a need for the Buffalo Bills, is also something I need to work on next year as well. Kendall, how about you? What are some thoughts that you had?
I think it's interesting that you mentioned like the round grading stuff like that. That's literally why I do trait grading stuff. I feel like trait grading and just kind of stacking them more in that way and not like fixing it to a round is really beneficial to you in your process and how you can figure out like, okay, where was I wrong on this guy, maybe 3 years from now. Because of course, where someone is drafted round wise does ultimately come back to scheme fit and what they like in a player. But ultimately, I think the main thing for me, kind of echoing off that Terrell Bernard thing, is not to get so closed off on certain prospects because of what I see on the tape, because how they are wired and their culture fit and their character, work ethic, all of those things, I will never know until I get that dream job. You know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to know that stuff. So you have to take it with a grain of salt and understand that the tape is just part of that process. It's a piece of that puzzle. It's not everything. And, in the moment, I wasn't thrilled with the Kaiir Elam pick because I liked Andrew Booth's tape more. I just did.
Yeah.
But I don't know who Andrew Booth, the person, is or his medical issues and the extent of those. So for all we know, that's why Kaiir Elam had that first round grade and why Andrew Booth may not have for the Buffalo Bills. So I think kind of being more open-minded to the entire process in that puzzle, because the tape is only a piece of it. And as much as I want to, like Tilt said, I guess I'm taking from everyone here, like Tilt said, trusting your gut and being true to your thoughts. That's what I did this year with the tape and what I was analyzing with each of these prospects. But I failed to truly entertain what they could be as a person, and I just kind of stacked them that way, and I didn't entertain that, oh, you know, this guy could be higher because of this or that, he could be lower because of this or that. So I think being more open-minded, even with the top 30 visits and stuff like that, you know, just being open-minded through the whole process, that just because we don't know that this guy has been linked to the Buffalo Bills, I mean, we saw this year, like, there are so many different touch points for you to interact with a draft prospect. Like, and there's so many ways that it could go unreported. So I think open-mindedness is the key for me next year.
Yeah, and that was sort of the theme that I was going with here, was that sort of growth mindset approach. Kind of like Sean McDermott, you saw the way he was trying to hold back a smile when Kaiir Elam was mentioning his growth mindset. And yeah, you know, Dean Kindig of the, you know, Buff fan bases, he's the only one that I really know that like goes into YouTube, watches the interviews, and like sort of breaks those guys down. And I think that's one of the things I'm going to do next year is look at their backstories, maybe watch some more interviews, pay more attention at the combine to the backstories of some of these players, et cetera. Because I really do think it's important. And we're going to touch on that when we touch on Kaiir Elam here in a second. But before we get to Elam, I have one Bills specific topic before we get to these prospects that I want to talk about, because I think it's the biggest question that remains after the draft. Interior offensive line wasn't drafted this entire draft. Dave, does that shock you at all that the Buffalo Bills completely sort of disregarded the interior offensive line position? It wasn't until I think they've added 3 or 4 UDFAs now. It's either 3 or 4. I don't even know the names off the top of my head. I have them on my note sheet here. I got to scroll down. But what does that just shock you that the Buffalo Bills didn't even sort of entertain really interior offensive line?
It's a version of shock, right? It probably isn't as extreme as being shocked, because I've learned, and this is one thing I have gotten the growth mindset on, could definitely compared from 2020 or from 2021 to 2022, was the way being drafted last year. That forced me to not rule anything out, at least from a position standpoint, right? Don't rule out a certain position in a certain round, because going to defensive ends back to back last year, then going tackle, and not addressing interior offensive line either last year, except for Jack Anderson, basically set me up to say, if they draft one, that's great. I want them to, but if they don't, I'm not the GM, right? And so I think what it does is it probably speaks to more about how they think about the guys they have on the roster than it does anything about really about the draft class, right, of interior offensive line. Because we saw, I mean, everyone could see our reaction in the 3rd round on Friday night when Dylan Parham was sitting there and went one pick later after Terrel Bernard. We were all kind of like scratching our heads for a bit, right? Because now this is really, if you think about it, outside of Jack Anderson, 2 years in a row where this position, this position has not been addressed during the draft. And they've managed to patch it, right, with guys like Roger Saffold, right? And they've got Ryan Bates back in the mix. And like, they tried to sign Forrest Lamp last year and it didn't work out. But like, outside of Cody Ford, they really haven't invested, you know, kind of early draft capital on that. And I hate to say, like, the risk in Cody Ford is kind of maybe got some buyer's remorse for them, because they traded up to get Cody Ford a couple years back. Every draft's different, so I'm not trying to connect the dots too much there. But then part of what Kenny says here too is, like, you have Aaron Cromer now, new offensive line coach. He probably had some input into the guys on the current roster saying, like, hey, I can work with this, or I can work with that. Like, we have something here. And it's also possible that the Bills did have interior offensive linemen highly graded on their board, but with the way the boards fell in each round, it just maybe didn't work out that it made sense for them to take guys in those spots. So that's how I'm kind of reacting to it now.
Yeah, like, there was a spot, I don't know if you guys have seen it. I'm going to reference this article at least 10 times tonight, so be prepared for that. But Mike Silver was actually in the Buffalo Bills draft room throughout the entirety of the draft.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he works for Bally Sports now, and he wrote up the article, and he published the article today. I believe I retweeted it on our Bills Guys account, and essentially walked through the draft, and he revealed what I guess Bean would let him reveal. But one of the things that he mentioned was Brandon Bean and the Buffalo Bills were watching their draft board get absolutely decimated in the 4th round when they didn't have a 4th round pick.
Right.
So maybe if the Buffalo Bills had a 4th round pick, they pulled the trigger on a interior offensive lineman. Now, Bean came out and said, I probably would have taken Khalil Shakir with their 4th round pick when the 4th round pick came up. But at the same time, if your board is getting decimated because you don't have that 4th round pick. Maybe the board might have fallen a different way when Shakir was up there. Maybe there would have been an interior offensive lineman. Maybe they would have used the 5th rounder on an interior offensive lineman, and that one went away by the 6th round. Like, so you're right. Losing that 4th round pick, I think really set the Bills up to maybe not take that interior offensive lineman. But I'm looking at some of these UDFAs that they signed. Derek Kerstetter from Texas, 6'5", 305. Right here on SAS, one of his 3 strengths, position versatility. He's got a very similar size to Ryan Bates when he came out of Penn State in that trade when he was a UDFA. Alec Anderson from UCLA, guard, tackle, flex. You know they like Sean Ryan. UCLA has that Chip Kelly pro-ish type of offense that, as sad as it was the best in the Pac-12. And then they add like a freakish 6'5", 295-pound guy in Tanner Owen from Northwest Missouri State. So they've added some really, like, all 3 of these UDFA guys. I'm pretty pumped about all 3 of them. And I can't wait to maybe learn some more of their backstory, get a couple articles on these guys like dug up, because I did some basic research, couldn't find much. So it should be really exciting. I have high hopes. I don't think any of these guys are going to make the roster, but I have high hopes that you could practice squad a couple of these guys, and maybe they could make a name for themselves, in 2024, like, make a name for themselves in training camp, not this year, but the year after, or maybe mid-season. So, really hopeful for some of these UDFA guys. Brooke comes in. Appreciate you, Brooke, with the super chat. She said, what I missed, haven't been paying attention at all. Finals and the Amherst have had my attention as of late. Hope all is well. Well, you missed a heck of an NFL draft, Brooke, and don't worry that you missed it, because we're about to break it all down for you. Perfect segue, Brooke. So we appreciate it. So we're going to get into the NFL draft right now, and we're going to go pick by pick, and we're going to we've had some time to reflect on all the Buffalo Bills picks, and share what you guys have and what your guys' thoughts now that you've had some time to reflect in the comment section, and we're going to reflect on some of the picks as well. Obviously, we're going to start with pick number 23 and Kaiir Elam, the cornerback out of Florida. I mean, it's this guy should have seen it coming, probably, in retrospect. The traits, the intangibles, combine that with his work ethic and his mindset that we saw in that combine video that was posted on top of the Buffalo Bills, probably feeling that they could coach this position up. It was just a perfect storm of all of these different things that led to the Kaiir Elam pick. I'm going to once again reference this Michael Silver article from Bally Sports, and I want to read a couple of paragraphs from it. And this is all surrounding the Buffalo Bills first-round pick, Kaiir Elam. So Mike Silver is quoting Brandon Beane here. So Brandon Beane is telling Mike Silver, we can just see who's at the top of our board, and there are positions on each side of the ball we'd like to bolster, he said. And if there's a group of people we feel similarly about and we believe we'll get one of them eventually, and if someone wants to come up and we can pick up some extra assets, we definitely feel comfortable moving back. Brandon Beane essentially went into the 2022 NFL draft wanting to trade out of the first round. He pretty much, that's what he told Mike Silver there. Like, listen, pick 23, most of our first round grades are going to be gone. We feel comfortable with a lot of guys at a lot of different positions. You saw them use that same strategy in the second round with James Cook. I think the Buffalo Bills would have loved to have traded back, but Beane continued. Moving up to take a player, he insisted, was much less likely. Quote, if I trade up for someone tomorrow, Beane said, that means I really love him. So you saw Brandon Beane go up, and he mentions later on in the article, he's like, I don't want to lose sleep. I don't want to, 2-3 years from now say, man, I wish I would have taken that player I love. I wish I would have taken that player I believe in. I wish I would have taken that player with the last first round grade. So as much as he wanted to trade back, as much as he didn't want to sacrifice that fourth round pick in a draft where he talks about that's where the strength of the draft was, he had to go get his guy. So if you're a Buffalo Bills fan, I think that's the number one thing to be excited about is Brandon Beane went up there and he got his dude. So I think that's the number one thing to be excited about for Kaiir Elam. So Dave, I'm going to start with you. Where do you see him fitting with this Buffalo Bills team, both in the short term and the long term?
Well, in the short term, right, until Trey's back, he's CB1, right? That is the reality of the situation. You traded up in the first round to get this guy. He's top 25 pick. You gushed over him in You saw how they talked about him in the Bills Embedded, right? Terrence Gray talking about like this guy's got size, he's got speed, he's got everything we're looking for our brand of football. And he's going to come in throughout the summer and he's going to have to be the CB1. And the thing that I absolutely love about it is that he has the mindset for it and he has the desire to do that, right? I mean, he is going to look up to Trey White, no doubt, but he is also going to be confident in his own ability while at the same time working hard, learning, right? Learning from mistakes, willing to learn from mistakes, as you heard in that interview, saying like, went back and looked at all the times I got beat, all this and all that. And honestly, somewhat rising above the noise. How many times do you think he had to hear about how his 2021 wasn't as good as his 2020? Meanwhile, he still only allowed 131 yards on 19 receptions in 2021. So, like, do you think he's tired of hearing about that too? Yeah, I'm sure. So he's got the right combination of characteristics from a mindset standpoint, obviously from a physical skill set standpoint, and he's a great fit for what the Bills do. So he's going to be CB1 until Trey comes back. And then hopefully at that point, when Trey comes back, we have exactly what I was hoping the Bills would have wanted. Like I wanted them to do last year. They just did it 1 year later, which was pair Trey White, superstar corner, with a potential superstar corner on a rookie contract. And you have the makings for a very special duo here for the Bills for the next couple years. And so for me, his role right now is CB1 until Trey White comes back. He'll then obviously be CB2. And then in the future, like you could be looking at the future CB1 of the Buffalo Bills, depending on, you know, what happens at the end of Trey White's next contract. Like we can't sit here and pretend to know what's going to happen. I mean, that's years down the road, but Kaiir is still going to be in his prime. He's not even 21 yet. So, I mean, he will be, I believe, when the season starts, if I'm not mistaken. But the fact is you've got yourself now what should be your CB2, at worst your CB2, and potentially down the road, maybe it's your CB1. So, like, it's a really nice situation for the Bills, and it really was a blend of getting need and value, I think, where they went up and got him at 23. So very happy about it.
Yeah, some
And
great
of course, picking it right was nice too. Got to throw that in.
John Herring, some great comments from the comment section. John Herring coming in saying, thinking of how it would have went down with Elam covering Kansas City's Tyreek Hill. You look at that game where Kaiir Elam had a lot of success against Jamison Williams of Alabama. And now we have Tyreek Hill in our division. So a guy who can maybe match up with some of that speed is something that's really interesting. And Kenny Riggleman came in earlier and said, I think Elam lets us play a little bit more press man when Trey gets back and helps us, get to the quarterback, the pass rushers get to the quarterback. That's something the Bills did a lot last year, where one side of the field, there was sort of a press man. The other side, there was a zone. So now you have the ability to sort of press on one side with a guy like Kaiir Elam and drop another guy like Trey White when he's healthy back into zone. I think that's something the Buffalo Bills are going to have a lot of fun with. Leslie Frazier's going to have a lot of fun with.
And let me just really quickly address this point, because I don't want to be giving misinformation. I don't know one way or the other whether Trey's going to be ready for the season opener. We hope he is. But my point is that he's not going to be ready during mini camps and probably not for training camp for most of training camp. So right now, objective one, and obviously best scenario, I think right now is Trey being ready for the opener. That's in my mind what I'm accepting, right? And if he's not, he's not, right? So I don't know. We will see. We hope that he's back for the opener.
Yeah, for sure. Kendall. So in that Mike Silver article, it seemed like Brandon Beane started to get a little antsy when Trent McDuffie went off the board. Kansas City traded up. It seems like maybe that was one of the guys, whether Trent McDuffie was a first-round grade and Kaiir Elam was a higher first-round grade, or whether Elam was after Trent McDuffie. It seems like a real possibility that Trent McDuffie was on the Buffalo Bills board. So number one, does that sting a little bit for you? I know it stings for Ant. Does it sting for you? And having some time to reflect and look up, and research and really comb through the film on Elam's game. Is there anyone else you rather would have taken at that pick 23?
I mean, based on the tape, like, yeah, I would have rather have Andrew Booth, but like I'm stretching. Like, I'll talk about opportunity cost more with the other picks because I think there are other ways. Speaking retroactively and kind of like working backwards through the draft, you could see like if we went somewhere else in the first round, you could see where we could have gone in the later rounds. But like, I've come around to the pick. Like, that bottom line, like I have come around to the pick. Speaking on the McDuffie point, yeah, Bean mentioned McDuffie multiple times in that presser. Like, I'm talking like 3 times he used the name McDuffie. So that tells me that he was one of those first round grades for Brandon Bean. And the second he goes off the board, you start getting antsy. Like you said, you get aggressive, you move up, you get your guy. If Trent McDuffie was 1A to Elam's 1B on being the guy for Brandon Bean, we'll never really know. But either way, the fact that they were grouped closely, or that, you know, he felt like the value met the need at the cornerback position and who those 2 players were, it's encouraging for me. The main thing for me is really like just the excitement and how he's wired. Because as much as I've had some reservations through the pre-draft process on his film, and now I'm like 6 games deep on him, either way, like I still have some of those same reservations, but I'm less concerned about him because of the way he's wired and the way he's like committed to this growth mindset and how he's always so committed to improve. And Brandon Bean said it in his presser, culture is important to us. And that's why we put him in the first round, which tells me maybe his tape wasn't a first rounder, but because his tape was a fringe first to second rounder and his culture fit was so tight and his work ethic was so high, all of that stuff, you start to see, oh, this dude has room to grow. He's not even 21 years. He'll turn 21 in 3 days from today. Like, he has room to grow. His ceiling is super, super high. So I think the biggest thing is that the fact that he has so much room to grow and he's also willing to grow and he shows that willingness. And then on top of that, like all of the scheme stuff we can do with him now, like think about everything we got out of Levi Wallace. And now imagine that souped up with athleticism, because you think about the amount of times that the Bills are defending 3-by-1 sets from offenses, and that one side of the one wide receiver side of things is essentially the cornerback is manning things up more or less. Now imagine that the Bills defense has the flexibility and the versatility to put Elam in that spot to man up that side of things. He can play in off, he can play in man, press man, and he can make it a lot easier for Leslie Frazier to mix things up and create less of a vanilla defense on the back end, where the offense kind of knows what everyone's responsibilities are going to be, because they're so sound with their technique and their responsibilities. But once you start finding like versatility and positionlessness on the defensive side of things, it becomes more difficult for the offense to know what the defense is going to do pre-snap. So I think Kaiir Elam gives the Bills defense a little bit of that on the back end of things.
Yeah, and I think it might just be also like sort of, you mentioned it, like maybe Elam didn't have first round tape, but he had first round medical, he had first round physical intangibles and traits, and he had a first round interview. So that's 3-1 when you're going and doing this. A guy like Andrew Booth, there are those medical questions. So maybe a guy like Andrew Booth had had first round traits and had first round tape, but he had a second round interview and he had a very concerning medical. So that could have dinged his grade. So when you sort of like, and that's sort of the thing where when we're, you know, in that pre-draft process, like we were on these shows, a guy like Kaiir Elam, it's like, well, he's a toolsy guy. If the Bills draft him, we trust the coaches, you know, blah, blah. And then we move on to the guy we're more excited about when you look at the tape, or a guy you're more excited about for various different reasons. So I think that's one of the things, obviously, that I think we're going to learn for next year is even some of these guys where we're like, well, they got the traits, but, you know, I really don't like their tape that much. But hey, if the Bills draft him, I'll be cool with it because I trust their coaches. Maybe we'll dive deeper into them a little bit more next year. Because we talked about Elam on this show, but we definitely did not talk about Elam to the extent we talked about Kyler Gordon or Andrew Booth or Trent McDuffie. So that's definitely something we got to learn for next year. One thing before we move on to our second round pick, James Cook, I tweeted this from the Bills guys account yesterday, and I think it's worth mentioning. there seems to be a pattern with guys that Brandon Beane drafts. And it's always guys who show up in like the future mock drafts. So like a couple of years ago after, a certain draft, it's like, the way too early mock drafts. Ed Oliver was like a top 10 prospect the year before he came out. Gregory Rousseau, before he sat out a year, was like a top 5 prospect. Kaiir Elam was CB2 heading into this year behind Eric Sting. It wasn't Sauce Gardner. If you looked at the way too early mock drafts last year, Kaiir Elam was a top 10, 15 pick, like in a lot of those articles. So a guy like Kaiir Elam, injuries, had that off year, etc. But it makes sense where those guys were in the way too early mock drafts for a reason. They were the highly sought after recruits. They're the guys with the traits. They're the guys who are, athletic specimens, et cetera, et cetera. So Buffalo Bills clearly, I think, have a type. I haven't had a chance. I plan on spending some time this week going through the way too early 2023 mocks, and seeing if maybe there's a couple of players I can hone in on. I was looking at safeties and I was trying to find some safeties, but I don't think it's going to be a deep safety class next year. The two names that I saw were Jordan Battle from Alabama, who I'm never high on Bama safeties, and Jalen Catalon from Arkansas, who I like, but I wouldn't exactly call him like a physical specimen. And he was showing up at the tail end of that first round, not the early parts of that first round. So it'll be really interesting. The tight end class is loaded. And there's some other fun positions as well. Quarterback specifically, so we don't have to worry about that. So maybe a really good player will drop to us next year. But I digress. We don't need to talk about the 2023 draft yet. All right, on to the second round. And with their second round pick, the Buffalo Bills selected James Cook, brother of Dalvin. I probably shouldn't even mention that. I feel bad for the poor kid. That's all they freaking talked about.
I know.
Your brother this, your brother this. Shut up. Like, we know he's Dalvin Cook's brother. But this is a guy, dynamic receiving ability, really good change of direction, elusiveness. He's a very versatile guy. He is a little bit smaller at 5'11", 199 pounds. Dave, where do you think the role for James Cook is short term? And then eventually long term, because Devin Singletary is a unrestricted free agent after the season.
Yep. So I've categorized kind of my role types for this list in preparation for the show. So Kaiir Elam, to me, he's role type for me, starter, right? That's kind of how starter from day one. For James Cook, I've kind of labeled him for now as what I'll call a prominent contributor. That could mean starter to some people. That's not how I'm kind of labeling him. I'm labeling him as a prominent contributor, but just because I know how the Bills use their running backs or how they have to this point has been very much rotational, other than the very tail end of last year where Singletary got the lion's share of the work. However, when you draft a guy in the second round with a skill set like James Cook, who has very good athletic testing, who can basically be a receiver, line up as a receiver, who can hit the home run, who brings pass catching ability out of the backfield that you haven't had on this roster. And you've now added an element to the offense that you have not had really since Josh Allen's been the quarterback of this team. He is at worst a prominent contributor, and maybe at best becomes the RB1 at some point during the season and into the future, knowing that Devin Singletary is a UFA at the end of this year. So if you look ahead, I mean, if you're going to kind of look ahead and say what his role will be in the future, he could be the RB1 in the future. Now, his size may limit his ability to do that, but we also know that the running back position, at least to this point in the Bills offense, hasn't been like a grinded out, like 20 carry a game type of guy. So that might be okay for a guy like James Cook. So year one, certainly prominent contributor, 67 career receptions, 6.5 career yards per carry. Will fit great in the zone scheme, I think, that Cromer and the Bills staff is going to deploy, and obviously brings that added element that you haven't had as a receiver out of the backfield, and not even just out of the backfield, but you could line him up as a receiver too. So easily prominent contributor and maybe even a future, like, I'll call it starter for this team.
And very under the radar too, because, like I said, Brandon Beane kind of downplayed him in that press conference. He said, listen, we lost out on J.D. McKissick. We see him as sort of that passing down, change of pace back, blah, blah. You don't spend a second rounder on that. Like, I'm sorry, you don't. In this offense, even where the Buffalo Bills are, you don't spend, even after trading back twice, you don't spend a second rounder on that. Aaron Cromer could be huge because if you want James Cook on the field, you're probably going to want him to pass protect, but you also have a situation where this guy could just be a mismatch. You know, Greg Thompson and other people were talking about it. It's like, just imagine the Buffalo Bills coming out 12 personnel with OJ Howard, Dawson Knox. You know, you got, Gabriel Davis, Stephon Diggs, and then James Cook in the backfield. And then they all just go split out 5 wide. And James Cook can literally run wide receiver routes. You know, Brandon Beane was on with Pat McAfee, like right at the beginning of the offseason. And, Pat was just asking him questions, and he was like, yeah, this draft is crazy. He said there are some running backs who are practically wide receivers. And I'm starting to think there was one guy he was referring to when that thought came into his head, and that guy was James Cook. So it'll be really interesting to see how they utilize James Cook. I think Cromer will help him. He's got to be a better pass protector. But Kendall, before I sort of get into was the value there to take him, do you think James Cook has what it takes at 5'11", 199 pounds? Maybe sort of he needs to improve some of the more technical aspects of his game. Do you think he's got what it takes to be an every down back in the National Football League?
I think he could be, but I think his career would be best served to have a complement at all times. I think he's someone that would be best to pair with, I don't want to say a power complement, so to speak, but just a complement that could make up for whatever he loses, because I think he could definitely progress it. He could add 5 pounds, not lose a whole lot of athleticism and speed, and he could become a powerful, stout pass blocker and sufficient in terms of contact balance. Actually, he already is sufficient in terms of contact balance. He could become more sufficient plus in that regard, or in the power department, in goal line situations, things like that. So that's not what he is now. But I think in terms of longevity for his career, I think he would be best served to have a complement next to him, be a 1A, 1B situation.
Yeah, it's going to... sorry.
I was just thinking about this when Kendall was saying that, and I was like, what pairing, like in recent memory, would be like a good pairing that like James Cook could be like compared to? And I like think back to a few years ago before Austin Eckler was really like the feature back for the Chargers, and they had Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler was in that complementary role. And I kind of see him in a pairing like that, right? Like Melvin Gordon's not this like Derrick Henry type power guy. I mean, he was thicker than Eckler, but he was a nice complement to Eckler.
He's a balanced back.
And then Eckler was really kind of their passing down back for a while. Now he's obviously taken over the reins, and Eckler is obviously a thicker dude than Cook, but that type of pairing could really be nice. Like, Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, maybe.
And I think that would be good. I think that would be good for him, like in the short term. And then perhaps, in year 3 of his rookie contract, he could be the bell cow. I'm not hoping on it, but I think he could.
And here's the one thing, and a couple of people have made this comment on Twitter with the Kamara comps. Physically, they might look very similar, but Alvin Kamara's contact balance is like elite, insane. Like out of this world elite.
Insane.
I don't know if you guys have ever had a chance to see highlights or videos of Alvin Kamara working out, but some of the things he does while balancing on medicine,
he works on it. Yes.
Listen, James Cook, if you ever want to spend an off season with Alvin Kamara, I don't mind, but I think it's a couple of things are interesting to me, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. And I know we're going to deconstruct the offense on Thursday, so I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, but I look at the offense, and it's Devin Singletary and Zach Moss as the 2 traditional-ish type of backs. And then the rest of the depth chart is James Cook, Duke Johnson, Tywan Jones, and Blackshear from Virginia Tech. Those are all like scatty type of like third down backs. There's only 2 traditional running backs on this Buffalo Bills team. And then I hear Josh Allen make comments today, like the number one thing I'm working on this offseason is ball placement because we have to improve our yards after the catch. We've been talking all offseason about maybe getting a little finger quotes traditional with 12 personnel. I don't know, man. The way our running back depth chart is stacking up, I think you could see a lot of 12 personnel, even with those non-traditional, like power, finger quotes, power running backs, because of how you can flex out of it into other things. So I'm so looking forward to seeing what Ken Dorsey and Aaron Cromer are working on in the lab, because with all the pieces the Buffalo Bills have added, Khalil Shakir, OJ Howard, bringing back Isaiah McKenzie, Jamison Crowder, James Cook, to go on top of all of these weapons that we already have. Like, I made the comment on Twitter. I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be the most multiple offense in the league next year.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's going to, quite frankly, even be close. Dave, what do you think about that?
They have put the pieces in place to do that. I think there's, and I didn't mention this when I was talking about Cook, but one of Ken Dorsey's toughest assignments and one of the things he's really going to have to shine on is figure out how to utilize Cook in the offense and really just make sure he manages this offense appropriately in general. Because I do think the pieces are in place. He needs to figure out how to use a back that really the Bills for the last couple of years haven't had this type of back, obviously with Ken Dorsey on the staff in place. So as a first-year offensive coordinator and with a player now that you really hadn't had before in the offense, like Ken Dorsey's got a tough assignment. Now, maybe this is like his bread and butter. We will see. We don't know, right? We don't know. So there's a lot of potential here based on the personnel. It's going to have to marry up appropriately with Ken Dorsey as the play caller and whatever he envisions for this offense. But also, some of these things are on the players as well, like Josh Allen improving his ball placement to actually create opportunities for Yak. I hate when people say, like, just go out and get a Yak guy. Like, how much it matters what position that receiver is when he catches the ball in order to be able to get Yak is like, I mean, Kendall as a tape guy can probably say better than me, but like, it's not all just about the receiving end. It's about how and where that player catches the ball that makes Yak possible. So all these people saying, oh, if we had more Yak guys, Josh would have thrown for 6,000 yards. Like, that's not how it works, right? That's not how it works. So yeah, for me, love the potential with the personnel, and Ken Dorsey now, man, you've got to step up to the plate.
Kendall, how are you? Kenny Riggleman comes in and says Dorsey does have experience. He was in Carolina when they had the likes of Cameron Newton. I don't know why I just called him Cam Newton, and Christian, probably because I was thinking Christian Christian McCaffrey. So and Curtis Samuel was there too. So he has the experience to run a QB and a receiving running back. What are your thoughts? Like, how multiple do you think this offense is going to be? Am I finally going to get my wish? We're going to be able to, pound the ball down your throat on one play and spread you out 5 wide the next.
I think that's what I'm most excited about with James Cook. The mind games that we can start playing with defenses. And I think my biggest fear with James Cook is perhaps that he's the biggest tendency giveaway in the backfield right now in Buffalo. Out of the presumably top 3 of Singletary, Moss, and Cook, I think Cook is the guy that's giving away the tendency of pass more than anyone else. And perhaps a pass that isn't even showing a pass protection where it's just the 5 guys up front. So beyond that, the multiplicity to it is exactly what you said. The fact that we can roll out in 12 personnel, whether this is Singletary, Moss, or Cook, because I think they all have the requisite skill set to do what I'm about to say. You have a running back on the field. You have 2 tight ends on the field. You have Diggs and Davis. You go into the huddle, you're challenging that defense to match you personnel-wise and put 3 linebackers on the field. So you line up with both your tight ends in line. You could be in shotgun, you could be under center, whatever it is, but there's a running back in the backfield, and they're assuming it's a run because it's a heavier personnel. And then you split it out. You get a little bit of that Iowa State stuff that they did this year with 2 tight ends on the field, but it's all split out, man. Like, this is truly empty backfield. Everyone is split out wide, and everyone can possibly run routes. And like I said, this goes for Singletary and Moss as well. Granted, they may not be at the level of Cook, but then you run that vice versa, and you do the same thing. You have that personnel out there, and you have 3 linebackers on the defense to match that personnel. And you start with everyone split out wide, and they're assuming pass. And then you get into run situations. And if they don't have 3 linebackers set out there, you have everyone split out wide, and it's 5 wide in that way. And they're like, okay, Cook's on the field. We're going to match it in this way because Cook's on the field. So we're going to go into nickel. We're going to have 2 linebackers on the field. You bring everyone back in, everyone's in line, and you run a traditional run play. So the Bills can dictate scheme and strategy in that way with a positionless player like James Cook. And I mean, he is truly a running back first, but he has in his career 19.5% of slot snaps. When he's in a receiving play, he has 19.5% slot snaps and 6% out wide. So he truly can be used in every area in that regard. So I'm excited for the offensive possibilities with multiplicity, like you mentioned, Judge.
So before we get to Terrel Bernard here, the numbers came out today. Kaiir Elam 24, James Cook 28. We're a big numbers podcast. Any thoughts? I don't know if I like 28 for James Cook. Any thoughts on these numbers?
I think CJ Spiller comes to mind, and that
I
could be the issue.
I didn't even think about CJ Spiller. I just don't like the number 20.
Well, CJ Spiller switched from 28 and 21 with McKellen.
Him and Leota switched. Yeah. I have a Spiller rookie jersey where he was like 28.
So this is my current issue. I'm trying to figure out which Bills jersey to get for my birthday. And I think I'm leaning towards James Cook, even though I'm acknowledging they're probably going to churn and burn a running back. But my biggest fear,
solid 3-year investment, the memories.
Right. My biggest fear is that he's going to change his number like Singletary did after training camp. That's my biggest fear.
True. All right. So hold off. And here's speaking of guys, I hope change the number. So you guys heard me. I was on my soapbox after the Bernard pick, and I wanted to make sure that because I love Terrel Bernard, the football player, and I love Terrel Bernard, the human. We were just questioning sort of the fit, during the draft process. As a show of solidarity and as a show of my support, I wanted to get a Terrel Bernard jersey. 43 is not doing it for me. I really hope he switches that number.
Was it Brian safety? Scott was 43?
Safety? The safety-like number from
it is. Yeah. I mean, Brian Scott was like that safety linebacker.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a hybrid number.
So Terrel Bernard, he comes in. He's obviously got an injury history. He's got the size concerns. Brandon Beane made it clear that if Terrel Bernard was bigger, he would have been a much higher draft pick. And I love that quote. I love that quote. I do think I agree with him. In that Mike Silver article, he referenced Sam Mills as a guy in his time in Carolina that had a career despite his sort of size issues. London Fletcher is another player that you've seen. I always think of Zach Thomas too, and I think of undersized linebackers that had success in the National Football League. But I mean, the guy plays with controlled violence. He impacts the running and the passing game. He's just a tough football player. He's got good range. He's an effective blitzer. He's an exciting player and an exciting tool, and we've had some time to process now. So, Dave, I'm going to start with you. What's his fit for the Buffalo Bills, both short-term and long-term?
Okay, yeah. So, fit, I have him not as a prominent contributor. I just have him as a contributor, right? So, like a tier down from a James Cook, where I think he's going to contribute this year, but I don't think it's going to be as a prominent contributor outside of injury, right? So I see his role here, at least in 2022, as the primary backup to Matt Milano, as a will linebacker. I know that was his primary role at Baylor, although he did play both Will and Mike at Baylor. And I see him being a special teams contributor, right? So from that standpoint, that's where I see him in 2022. Obviously, he has like a lengthy injury history, so maybe it's not such a bad thing that the Bills maybe don't ask too much of him his first year, right? Really, really excellent blitzer, as Kendall will hopefully confirm based on the tape he watched. But 31 tackles for loss and 16 and a half sacks as a linebacker in his career, and SIS describes him as having controlled violence. Was the phrase they use. So as a proficient blitzer, maybe there's some situations where you get him onto the field this year and that sort of, maybe not necessarily as the will, but as a blitzer, like in the AJ Klein mold, where he, they used AJ Klein somewhat throughout his career here as a blitzer, even though he didn't get a ton of run and base defense. So there are little spots where you can leverage a guy like Bernard. And maybe add a few wrinkles to your defense, and not even just wrinkles, but like maybe use some things that you used for AJ Klein in the past, but maybe because athletically there was some limitation with AJ Klein that you maybe don't have with a guy like Terrel Bernard, and you can use him even a little bit more so in that role to generate some pass rush. Anywhere where you can generate some creative pass rush, I'm all for it. So for me, that's kind of where I see Bernard's role this year. Backup Will directly to Milano. Talk about the future, maybe him, being a backup Mike. I don't know. Playing special teams and maybe being, somewhat of a linebacking pass specialist, a pass rush specialist.
Yeah. So I'm still, I think you're spot on there with a lot of it. I think he comes in first year. I think he's a special teams maven. I think he might even be able to, like with his ability on special teams, maybe push a guy like Tyler Matakevich off the roster. So you can have actual like linebackers who can actually play defense. Like, oh, we can keep Tyrell Dodson now because we have Terrel Bernard, like things of that nature. So Bernard's an upgrade over Dodson, but then we can also keep Dodson because we can bump a guy like Matakevich off of the team, save some money, etc. So that's, I think, a possibility, something I'm going to look at during training camp.
Mm-hmm.
Our guy Ryan Sullivan talked about how he looked into a little bit of the Terrell Bernard background. He wants to be a strength and conditioning coach, so maybe I still got some hope they can get into this world-class weight room, chonk up a little bit, get a little more thicker. He's thin. Brandon Bean sort of broke my heart. I thought maybe they'd be trying to switch him to safety, but that does not look like it's going to be.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that's the thing.
An option. So, Kendall, I'm going to kick it to you. I know on draft night it was all about like Dylan Parham was the next pick. Sean Ryan went right after as well. I know Eric talked a little bit about how maybe a guy like Terrel Bernard could be used against teams with tight ends as sort of a tight end stopper.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about some of the things that maybe Bernard can do, ways you think he can fit. And if after watching his tape, you still have that same feeling of, man, I wish we would have taken a guard in that third round with that third round pick. Has he won you over?
I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to start with the opportunity cost because I do want to talk about the player well, but I want to start with the opportunity cost. So I am still hung up because I do ultimately still wish we picked Dylan Parham in the third round. The opportunity cost for me is you get Dylan Parham and then at pick 180 and later, which is the pick that we took punt god, of course. So bear with me. There's only one player here that Darian Beavers would be the player you would have had to take at 180. Obviously, we know this is a dominoes game. You take a different player one place. And
Beavers went to the Giants, which means the Bills probably had interest.
But the Giants do play a three-man front, so it is different.
And a completely different linebacker, too. Yeah, completely different linebacker.
Exactly. So I wanted to include all different things, but I did like Darian Beavers, the player. So if we took Parham in the third round, sixth round and later, Darian Beavers, Malcolm Rodriguez, Chance Campbell, and Baylon Spector are all available in the later.
I would have taken Parham, Campbell, and Spector. That would have been beautiful.
Right. So, and the thing is, you don't even have to double up. You could just take Chance Campbell, but we'll get there when I get to opportunity cost. Either way, I am coming around on the pick. Don't get me wrong, but if I had to pick, I still would go back and take Parham. Either way, love the process fit. Like, oh my God, this dude just screams process culture fit just as much as Kaiir Elam does. The quotes about how he picked up like what the Bills wanted from him with those private workouts with Babbage, that kind of stuff. And Bean saying like, he might start teaching some dudes what to do faster than we think and all that kind of stuff. It screams process, great stuff. But I think right away, like you said, special teams, I think that's going to be his calling card right away. But I do wonder if he is truly our answer to Big Nickel and a mix between Big Nickel and AJ Klein role. Somewhere in the middle. Thick dime, sure, exactly. He's somewhere in the middle of that. And that's where really what I wonder, because right away we were like, what is this dude's path to playing time? So I'm starting to fiddle with that and think that maybe that could be the case. You take Teron Johnson off the field and you add Terrel Bernard, you get maybe a hair more in the run game and the blitz game, but definitely a hair less in the passing game. But it's not a major drop off or advantage in either area. It's just, you're adding some weight. I would like to see him get to 230. I think that would help me a lot just mentally. In terms of the metrics and stuff like that, his pass rushing in terms of blitz production is just nuts. It is absolutely nuts. And the
Von Miller is going to help him too. Von Miller could even show him a thing or two.
That's the special thing. He doesn't win with technique. He wins with heart and just energy in terms of how he blitzes, because his pass rush productivity, according to PFF, which factors in your overall volume of pressures relative to the amount of opportunities you have, he was first amongst qualifying linebackers in this draft class. That's ahead of Leo Chenal, who's a great blitzer. That's ahead of Nakobe Dean, great blitzer. That's ahead of Devin Lloyd. Devin Lloyd was my favorite blitzer in this class because he had the technique and the energy. Bernard just has the energy. He has the heart. He just shoots in there like a bullet and gets it done. But being first in that regard, being first in that metric is absolutely huge. But on top of that, you can see that kind of shooting through the line of scrimmage with a bullet in a lot of ways. His stop percentage was 11.6 in 2021. That was tied for 8th amongst qualifying linebackers in this draft class. And his average depth of tackle was 2.5, which was tied for 15th in this draft class. So I think there's a lot to work with here. And I haven't even really talked about his pass coverage acumen. There is some athleticism there. I don't think it's as good as his RAS score suggests, but it is still good. And I think it can be worked with. He shows some pattern matching ability. He shows good zone awareness. His eyes and his processing of routes is very good. I like what he can become. And the only thing that really gives me cause for concern is just what's the path to playing time, because I'm going to use the word again, prognosticating of what his role is to be. And I'm thinking, it's somewhere in between that blitzing AJ Klein role and that big nickel role. That's where I'm coming down with this. So I like the player, but I want some answers in terms of path to playing time. And I think preseason will help give me some of those answers.
Preseason gonna be so much fun. I was going through and I was redoing the depth chart. Like, what's gonna be the most fun is the fact that like there are no like hot ass quarterbacks on our team. Like in the fourth quarter of the preseason, we're gonna have Matt Barkley, who's like been there, done that in the National Football League, throwing the ball to some of these receivers and things like that. So like the offense is actually going to have like maybe a pulse in the fourth quarter of some of these preseason games. So that should be fun. Something to look forward to with no Christian
Get
Wade.
a chance to evaluate these skill players on the bottom half of the roster. With
Isaiah Hodgins, Marquez Stevenson. I'm looking forward to seeing some of these dudes and what they got. Obviously, Khalil Shakir, perfect segue. Khalil Shakir is up next. The Buffalo Bills trade up into the 5th round for Khalil, or trade up in the 5th round for Khalil Shakir, the wide receiver out of Boise State. Again, that article with Mike Silver, I tweeted it on the Air Raid Hour account on Twitter. Go read that article from Mike Silver. He talked about how in the 4th round, most of the Bills board got whittled away, which is disappointing. Obviously, Brandon Beam was probably not happy with himself for having to trade up to those 2 spots, but worth it because he got that player he loved. And it also mentioned after the Bills felt like they finally had to stop that run and they had to go up and get a guy. That guy was Khalil Shakir. Brandon B mentioned he got several texts from fellow front office personnel pissed that he jumped up and drafted him. Not to mention the fact that he's donning the number 10.
Yeah, that warms your heart, doesn't it, Judge?
So Anthony Prohaska had to go put a nice little kibosh on this, but I had been saying
he subtweeted the shit out of you.
I liked it too.
He subtweeted the hell out of me. Good,
it was not you. It was everyone.
I started.
But right, and it hits you home. Yeah,
it hits home to me. So, but it's just like, so first of all, size. I'm going to forgive Anthony for the subtweet, but because he's a smart guy and he's not wrong. So 6 foot 196, very similar to Robert Woods. You look at his strengths as a receiver, burst out of his breaks, his intermediate routes, his short area quickness, the fact that he works the entire field, all of these different intangibles, his yards after the catch, very, very similar to ways in which Robert Woods finds success on a football field, ways in which Robert Woods wins on a football field. So when I saw Khalil Shakir, I saw a lot of shades of Bobby Trees. So no, he's not the run blocker that Robert Woods was. Maybe he'll get there someday. I do believe one of the knocks on his scouting report was that he's not the most willing of blockers. So that's something he's definitely going to have to work on.
He's good at it, but it's inconsistent.
But
love Bobby Trees.
When he put that number 10 on, when I saw that post today,
looks good.
Oh, dude, we're going to get to the McKenzie thing in a little bit. I'm going to be an old man who yells at a cloud, but yeah, Khalil Shakir, Buffalo Bills, 5th round pick. Dave, short-term, long-term fit, what do you see for him?
Yeah, short-term, it's really hard to not get excited about him, but I'm just labeling him as a contributor. I'm not going to say prominent contributor in the first year. He has a path to becoming what I guess you can consider a prominent contributor if he does become the kick and punt returner for this team, which he could. But for now, I'll label him as contributor, and I think he could be the future heir apparent in the slot in 2023 once Jamison Crowder is gone, assuming Jamison Crowder does only just play the 1 year here based on the contract. Now, I said the same thing on Twitter, heir apparent in the slot with kick and punt return ability, so it gives you a really nice floor of potential there. Look, route running, you mentioned, Steve, short area quickness. He's got the requisite skills, I think, to be a slot in the NFL. SIS had him as tied for first in their total points rating per route metric, which is essentially their combination of all their individual receiver metrics rolled into one. He was tied for first in the class with everyone. So, and he's been in the top 25 graded wise from PFF for the last 3 years. So he's been super consistent for Boise. So for me, I think right now, it's super easy to get excited about what he can do for you this year. But I also have to remember that we do have Jamison Crowder, who is a veteran. He is savvy. He is a very good player still. We have Gabriel Davis. We have Dawson Knox. We have Stephon Diggs, obviously. And now we have new toy James Cook as well. So I don't think it's fair to say right now to project him as a prominent contributor, but I do think he will be a contributor, and that may come at the expense of people like Isaiah McKenzie, but we will see. So I'll label him as a contributor right now with the potential to be more if he does become the kick and punt returner.
I'm really hoping that in his first year, his role is kick and punt returner, boundary. Brandon Beane said he's an inside guy, but he can also play on the outside. We're missing boundary depth. So if he's just wide receiver 5 and sort of Crowder and McKenzie are sort of the slot guys, and he's sort of the boundary depth, and he can also return kicks and punts. If he replaces Marcus Stevenson, like that excites me. Like that's sort of the role I want for Khalil Shakir. Now, Marcus Stevenson could still carve out a role in this team because the one thing you're looking at, the one thing that Marcus Stevenson has that no one else in the wide receiver room has is he can go and he can take the top off. Like he's like the one guy with that take the top off speed. So that's going to be Marcus Stevenson's sort of path to try to make the football team. Maybe we take 7 wide receivers, maybe we don't, but just super, super excited. Kendall, you were playing the clips of this guy. There's no doubt in anyone's mind, like he was the value pick in the 5th round, right? There's no one else. Obviously, like you could talk about a couple of the interior offensive linemen like Donovan West, who ended up going undrafted, probably because of a medical we don't know. Like he was the dude there, right?
Yeah, your boy Matt Alkiri on Twitter actually put out that the steal of the draft came in the 5th round, and it was the Chiefs getting Darian Kennard. And then right after he tweets, I should mention Khalil Shakir here as also the steal of the draft and also in the 5th round. So it was just crazy value being talked about.
Jamari
how
Salyer in the 6th to the Chargers. Jeez.
Yeah, that was
wild. They had a good draft too.
But Brandon Beane talked about how if they had a 4th round pick, like Shakir would have been the pick in the 4th round, and then lo and behold, they trade up in the early 5th round and they get their guy regardless. So yeah, the value pick is just obvious here. I think it was interesting that he talked about Shakir being able to play on the outside. I see some of that. I'm definitely not as worried about his release package as I've seen some people get worried about. I loved what he did at the Senior Bowl, showing his release package. He showed it on multiple occasions. He's got that suddenness, that short area quickness. He also shows some of that long speed. I don't think it's as great as how he tested. He tested low 4.4s. I thought he plays more high 4.4s, but either way, that's still fast. But it's not take the top off Stevenson fast. So to your point, yeah, that is still Stevenson's niche to make the roster. The way he runs routes in such a nuanced way to manipulate the DB, with pacing, leverage, all that good stuff. It's already at a high level. It already shows a high floor of what he can be at the next level. And then there's also what he can do athletically after the catch and in gadgetry different ways. You saw there was a jet sweep play in the clips I just showed. I should mention in the clips I just showed, he was injured in that game and he still looked phenomenal. He really struggles to go down easily. He's got great contact balance that like similar to that of a running back. He really does struggle to go down, and he shows that every single time he gets the football. Till I know you've made the comment before. He just finds sneaky ways to get more yards. And that's what he does. It's a perfect way to put it. It's sometimes not sexy. He's not always breaking off, spin moves and juke moves. He has shown that, but when he's not, he's just getting yards the dirty way, just because he has solid contact balance and good competitive toughness. So I really, really like the pick. I think contributor is a good floor for him, but I think in 2021, he really could end up being the third option in the wide receiver room.
Yeah, super high on Khalil Shakir, super pumped. In retrospect, I should have made him my no matter what over Taekwon.
I was going to ask you guys, did we hit one no matter what amongst 3 dudes?
I don't think we did.
I don't think we hit one.
You guys know, I went
you
up
were
to
high on Shakir.
I went up to show list. I went up to showtime. I made the decision 5 minutes before showtime to go Taekwon Thornton over Khalil Shakir for my no matter what. And the reason was I wanted a boundary guy with some speed to take the top off, things of that nature, as much as I loved Khalil Shakir's game. And then lo and behold, the New England Patriots break my heart. So
Dylan Farmer was on our list. Ouch.
Yeah, we did not get one of our no matter what's. That was This is a rough draft for our some of our crushes here.
But I will say this though, a lot of our no matter what's got picked higher than probably consensus. So I think
one of you guys took Punt God.
No.
Well,
none of you said Punt God. Did we go Camarda, Stout, Stonehouse?
Nobody. No, Kendall and I didn't pick punters. Remember? I said just give me whoever, and I think that you just gave me Punt God. So it doesn't really count. It doesn't really count.
All right. Speaking of Punt God, in the 6th round, first of all, the 4th round, Jordan Stout, Jake Camarda, like, are you kidding me? I think that goes to show you, like, sometimes media hype and what NFL front offices think are different. Jordan Stout is a guy who went in the 4th round. He's more of a better positional kicker. Jake Camarda's got a big leg, massive hang time. He went in the 4th round as well, leaving the Punt God. And Matt Araiza said he does not like that nickname, so I'm going to stop calling him that after the show, I think.
Yeah.
So Matt Araiza was the Buffalo Bills pick in the 6th round. We're going to get into whether was he the best of what was left, because there are some deficiencies in this game that I think can be pretty concerning if you're the Buffalo Bills. But at the end of the day, he was the Ray Guy Award winner in 2022 or 2021. He finished the season with 51.19 yards per punt. He holds the NCAA record of punts with 50 yards or more with 39, and the record for punts of 60 yards or more with 18. He also had 2 punts of 80 yards or more this past season, including an 86-yarder that I think we've all seen. Former soccer player. He transitioned from soccer to football at his time with the Aztecs. He was also a pretty solid, not a great, but a solid kicker there. He's mentioned where he wants to be a kicker in the pros. Definitely not going to happen in Buffalo with a guy like Tyler Bass. But one of the things, and I just want to mention it before I kick it to you guys, I think the Buffalo Bills, despite the fact that he has flaws, like Stout is the better positional punter. Maybe the Bills probably like Stout better. Camarda is the better hang time punter. Maybe the Buffalo Bills liked Camarda better. They just happen to be off the board. But Matt Araiza is another dude that's wired the right way. This is a guy who wants to be the best. This is a guy who wants to do it all. This is a guy who runs down and tries to hit stick dudes as the punter. Brandon B mentioned that a number of times. And I think I was reading this ESPN article on him about when he declared for the draft. He said he studies NFL kickers. He models some of his approaches after Jake Bailey of the New England Patriots, a fellow left-footed kicker who's got a similar background to Matt Araiza. Jake Bailey's a very good punter in this league. So you see him sort of studying the type of punter that the Bills like, right? We poached Bajorquez from the Patriots. We like those left footers, all those certain things. So despite the fact that lack of holding, lack of maybe coffin corner ability, a bunch of different things, kicked in San Diego, not the craziest of weather compared to Buffalo, a bunch of reasons to be a little bit concerned. But also I think a guy who's wired the Bills way. Dave, what do you think? Like, what do you think Matt Araiza beats out Matt Hawk with all the deficiencies that I just mentioned? Because Brandon Bean said Matt Hawk is a very good, finger quotes, a very good NFL punter who had a bad year by his standards.
So we're going through the role types right for here, and I'm labeling him as a starter. Like I'm penciling him in. Like I'm penciling in Matt Araiza as the starter.
Not penning him in. Sharpie,
I mean, sure,
permanent marker.
I'll do pen that if you need to, like, you know, get the finger.
There's an erasable pen now. There's an erasable pen now. That exists.
You mentioned all the statistics, right? But I also feel like for some of the flaws you mentioned, it's like, well, it's not like we have Jake Bailey, right? We have Matt Hawk. So it's like, for me, it's not the biggest uphill battle to climb if you are Matt Araiza. Now, here's the thing. Remember a couple years ago when it was Tyler Bass going against Steven Hauschka in training camp, also a 6th-round pick, Tyler Bass, and the veteran was there, and Hauschka had been a good kicker in his career, but it was kind of coming to the end for him, and he had lost some juice in that leg, and like the Bills just went with Tyler Bass and were like, for better or worse, you're our kicker now, bro. Like, and that position, honestly, for the Bills is more important than punter, right? There were games last year where the Bills didn't even punt, so Araiza should be the starter. They can cut Hawk after June 1st and save over $1 million on the cap and only take a $350,000 dead cap hit. So financially, it also makes sense for them to go that direction as well. So I think for better or worse, he's going to be their punter. And honestly, it's a punter for the Bills. Like, he's not going to ideally punt all that often. So those games you were talking about in the preseason where like Matt Barkley or whoever wasn't going to be a hot ass quarterback, like I'm not going to mind too much if it's like the 4th quarter in some of these preseason games and we are hot ass on offense and he gets a couple chances to punt just to get experience, right?
That's
just to get
point.
experience, just get a few punts in, because like come regular season, like he's probably not going to have to punt that much. So less important than the kicker, obviously, but the Bills went that way with a kicker a couple years ago, saying, Tyler Bass, we're going with you over the veteran. I would see a similar path for the punt god. I'll say it one more time for this roster, and I'll pencil him in as a starter right now.
The things that nightmares are made out of, I think, for every Bills fan is the fact that the Bills really do value holding for Tyler Bass because the kicker is more important than the punter. You saw that. Like the Bills were so scared of punting last year that they told Josh Allen, you better not put us in a situation where we need to punt with Matt Hawk. I mean, you saw how bad it was in that Jets game. So they literally, the marching orders for Josh Allen were clear. Do not punt that football. Like, don't punt that football. You saw the Bills be uber aggressive in a lot of these games near the 50-yard line, but they were willing to put up with all of that BS because Tyler Bass was a really effective kicker. And because Matt Hawk is, finger quotes, an elite holder. So Kendall, do I need to be concerned? Do I need to talk me through these nightmare scenarios here for the Buffalo Bills, keeping a Matt Hawk over Matt Araiza?
I mean, to Tilt's point, like, I think you do just have to go with it for better or for worse. Whatever it is, you got to live with it. You kind of made your bed by drafting this guy. Now you got to lie in it.
This is a great comment.
This is a good comment. I don't have a lot of concerns. And the reason is, like, he's talked about how he's kind of put the kicking responsibilities to the side, and he understands like what it's going to take for him at the next level to be the best he can possibly be as a punter. He has to focus on that. And part of being a punter is being a good holder. And he's talked about the people he's surrounded himself with through this pre-draft process and what he's done to become a better punter, surrounding himself with former pros and all that stuff and some current pros. So I'm concerned that he has to still learn it and hone that craft, but I'm not concerned because it sounds like he's wired in the right way to work and be the best, like you alluded to at the start of this, Judge. I mean, he does seem like someone, although he said, I want to cross it off my bucket list and be a kicker and a punter at the same time because no one's ever done it. It seems like he's fully committed to being the best punter he can be first and foremost, and then hopefully crossing that off his bucket list.
And that's what I talk about, right? Like the way he's wired, the way he wants to be the best kicker, punter, he wants to do everything. Like that's just in his competitive nature. The way he runs down the field and tries to shellac people, the way he's wired tells me that like he'll be hyper focused on being the best holder he can be. So not something I think to be overly concerned. The only thing I'm concerned about is his number choice. Isaiah McKenzie switching to number 6. And
I didn't 19 for a punter either. I didn't love it.
I'm getting
he should have just taken 6 and left McKenzie with 19.
Well, there's a pecking order here.
Yeah,
I'm just like
one's the face of the franchise, one's a god. I mean, pick your poison.
It's just I'm not vibing on 14 for a punter or 19 for a punter. It's
not great.
And then even when I saw the Photoshop of Isaiah McKenzie in the 6, I still didn't love it. Did Isaiah McKenzie wear 6 at Georgia? Like, where did that come from?
I feel like he wore 4.
I don't know.
I'll have to.
I don't
Google
like
that,
it
but
either way. I'm not big on single digit numbers for receivers. I
You
don't.
guys are old man crotchety about
Oh,
this
like
whole thing.
Sanders had
it.
one,
I like
right?
certain numbers.
I guess Stevenson 5 isn't awful. It's not bad.
I don't hate that at all. For whatever reason,
I want him to give it
I've
to
never
Kaiir.
liked
He was
digits.
16 at Georgia.
I was thinking that too. I wanted Kaiir to get 5, but
He was 16 at Georgia. So take the 1 away, and you got who's 16 on the Bills? You couldn't get 16 from Isaiah Hodgins? Come on now, come on. 16 sucks for a receiver.
Guy's not going to sniff the field anyway.
16 sucks as a number in general. They should just get rid of the number 16 in football. Like, who wants? It's a dumb number.
We're really getting into the number talk.
Sorry. All right, we're gonna move on now to Christian Benford, cornerback from Villanova. It's ironic that the first player in the draft that I'd never heard of was selected by the Buffalo Bills. I pride myself in knowing everyone, and I had Christian Benford in a couple of my spreadsheets. He played in the Hula Bowl. But I never really dug into him that much. And by the time the draft rolled around, I forgot who he was. But looking at Pro Football Network, their scouting report, I'm going to read the positives for him. Physical cornerback who may be best inside at safety, quick flipping his hips in transition, possesses outstanding size, and physically beats down opponents to defend throws. Shows good discipline in zone, quickly picks up coverage assignments, and immediately diagnoses plays. Mixes it up with receivers throughout the route, possesses a solid burst to the action, and competes. The final analysis on him is that he's an aggressive corner with nice size who must play in a system facing the action. And he also projects as either a zone corner or a safety. So typically that's something that I think would be intriguing to the Bills. I know, Kendall, we were having this conversation in the group chat. You think it's his physicality that probably sold the Buffalo Bills on a guy like Christian Benford. My biggest disappointment is they're not just immediately moving him to safety. I'd prefer that with the lack of depth at safety and the crazy number of, sort of Christian Benford type corners that we already have on the team. But Dave, I'll start with you. Where do you see Christian Benford's fit? You see this man special teams, like he's got all the traits to be a special teamer, but do you see him cracking the 53 man?
This was hard for me because I really I spent more time on Christian Benford today than I did anybody else. And I still just came away just saying he's probably practice squad bound.
Yeah.
And look, I'm just trying to be realistic, right? The Bills, they only kept 5 corners last year, which includes Saran Neal, right? So obviously Kaiir Elam's going to be there. White, Taron Johnson, and probably Dane Jackson again. Oh, and Saran Neal is your 5. And then they've got the 4 safeties again. So like you said, Judge, if they had moved him to safety, could he had a chance to maybe beat out a guy like Jaquan Johnson as a dark horse roster spot at the tail end of the roster? Yeah, maybe so. But if he stays at corner, it's going to be a real uphill battle for him. And we're going to be talking about him like we were talking about like Elijah Griffin and Nick McLeod and guys like that. It's just going to be an uphill battle. And had the Bills not spent a first round pick, obviously, on Kaiir Elam, then okay, maybe we're having a different conversation. But now that they did, the only way I could really see him making the roster as a corner is if he beats out these other sort of developmental guys. Yeah. And for some reason, Trey White gets like put on PUP at the beginning. That's like the only way I could really see it. But I do love his ball skills, 14 interceptions in his career. He does have the size. He did not really test that well athletically on the agility metrics, which makes sense if you kind of wanted him to move to safety, but he's got all the accolades you want at the FCS level, right? He was a CAA first team defense in 2021. He was a CAA rookie of the year. He was third team defense in his rookie year, in his defensive rookie of the year season. And so look, he fits the kind of archetype, like you said, that Bill's zone sort of type of guy, but it's going to be an uphill battle for him to make the roster. So I can't, I'd love to see it, but I just don't see it.
I think Jim Wickens makes a great point. Like over training camp, if he shows that he can be a boundary corner, he can be a nickel corner, and he can be a safety, and he can be sort of a chess piece in that secondary. Like he can move around, he can adapt quickly and be serviceable at all 3 spots, and he can be a gunner on special teams. The Bills might see more value in that than a 4th running back who never sees the field anywhere else but special teams. So the Bills could see a little bit more value in that regard. But Kendall, you had a chance to break down the film of Christian Benford. Talk a little bit about what you saw in the film, and then talk about, like, are you a fan of the double dip? Were there other corners on the board you would have preferred in this situation? A guy like Josh Thompson, who ended up being a UDFA, comes to mind.
Right.
And, or any other position, because
Yeah,
your
like
job
Josh
today,
Thompson.
I don't think I ever told people. Dave's job was to talk about the fit. Your job was to talk about other guys that were on the board that could have been tempting to the Bills at each spot.
So I'll talk about the opportunity cost first. Or actually, I'll answer it this way first. I liked that the Bills double dipped in the sense that the second corner was a guy with versatility that could play safety. Judge, we talked about it a lot during this pre-draft process, saying if they do double dip at corner, it would be nice to make that second guy someone that could make the team at safety. And truly, I do believe his best chance to make this team is at safety. I think he has a better chance to make the team at safety, beating out guys like Josh Thomas and Jaquan Johnson than he does beating out the plethora of, Elijah Griffin, Cam Lewis, Nick McLeod, and like 5 other people that's escaping my brain. So that's kind of the thing with that. But in terms of opportunity cost, I really wanted an interior offensive lineman in this draft. And at pick 6 or pick 209 in the 6th round, Josh Thompson was someone I liked a lot. The Jaguars took a lot of UDFAs I liked. But in terms of people that got drafted, Laceta Smith, Chris Paul, Chance Campbell, and Monteric Brown are the ones that come to mind. The fact that
Daggers
Monteric
to my
Brown,
ears.
Monteric Brown also went to the Jaguars. So,
They had a great draft too, I thought.
I thought they had a good draft too. But I think it's tough to evaluate Benford right now. We're hounding Eric to get more tape on him because we only have tape against Penn State, and the tape isn't great. I can't lie to anyone and say that I'm like
you never asked me. I got Villanova connections.
Yeah, what do you have?
No, I don't.
Who do you know? What the hell, man?
Jay Wright is Jay Wright is my coaching idol. So I coach basketball in the fall.
So that's your connection.
Love Jay Wright. Yeah, my connection is just I really like Jay Wright, who's retired now. So maybe I can hit him up. Maybe that's a free time.
Maybe.
So
slide into those DMs.
So my thing with Benford right now is that I want more tape because I want to see what he's doing against the lesser level of opponents, because he didn't look great against the most NFL ready competition he played. And the only game we have is against Penn State, and that is the most NFL ready team that he played, and it just wasn't great. But if he dominated against the other competition, which he did by all metrics, he had 1 missed tackle the entire year. What was it, like 7 interceptions and 14 PBUs? I think I have the numbers wrong.
Yeah, it's 7 picks. No, he had 7 picks and 18 pass breakups.
It's ballpark for the pass breakups. Obviously, pass breakups are kind of different for whoever charts them. But either way, like, you can see the ball skills. Personally, on the tape, I thought he was quick to turn and transition, but it was stiff. And that stiffness, and you could see it in his agility scores, I think that is what speaks most to shifting him to. But like Phil said, that versatility, or maybe it was you, Judge, I'm already blanking. The versatility to play nickel, boundary corner, and safety could be the reason that he does crack this roster, but it is truly an uphill battle for him, in my opinion. That being said, I do want to get more tape on him.
Yeah, that was me who said it, but I was literally just reading Ian Cummings' scouting report on Pro Football Network. So kudos to Ian, who's one of my favorite follows on Twitter. All right, so that brings us now to the next pick. That was Luke Tenuta out of Virginia Tech, number 69. Nice. But other than that, 6'8", 319. I think the craziest thing was the fact that, we had Dean from Buffalo fan base on the show. He broke down like where all the places the Bills were visiting. The number one thing was like Virginia Tech. We ended up with 2 Virginia Tech Hokies between him and Blackshear, the UDFA. Shocked that they passed on a guy like Laceta Smith for Luke Tenuta, especially given the needs of the Bills and everything. But I look at Luke Tenuta, 6'8", 319. He had like a 4 RAS, but if you take his unofficial pro day numbers, he improved it to like an 8 or a 9 RAS. SIS has his strengths, his hand fighting, pocket awareness, blocking in space. His weaknesses as a high base, limited leg drive, and explosiveness. So maybe this is a situation where the Bills see a guy where, listen, Aaron Cromer sees a guy where like, all right, I can work on that high base. Our training staff can work on that limited leg drive, that explosiveness, and we might be able to have something in a couple of years. Like maybe a year or 2 down the road, we can have a prospect too. I don't see him making the 53-man roster. I think he's a practice squad guy. But Dave, what are your thoughts on Luke Tenuta? Coach's son, by the way, too. I believe someone said in the comment section. I didn't know this. His dad was the DB coach at Virginia Tech. His dad was also the DB coach for Antoine Winfield Buffalo Bills, Buffalo Bills. So that's super cool. Yeah. I didn't know that. So Dave, what are your thoughts on the fit for Tenuta on this team?
Yeah, I mean, I have him as practice squad as well. I mean, you look at some of his, grading and his metrics. I mean, PFF had him as the 219th overall prospect, so definitely a draftable grade from them. He was their 67th graded tackle in 2021, and he was actually 19th in 2020. So a little bit down in 2021, at least on the grading scale. But then if you turn the SIS's advanced metrics, he's actually rated top 10 in most of their advanced metrics when it comes to tackle metrics. So his only really poor metric was around positive percent run behind, which we talked about with Nicholas Petit-Frere a bit, which, if he's going to be the right tackle, you'd like to see that number, be up a little bit at 6'8", 3, whatever. He's probably projecting as a right tackle. Don't really see that sort of profile as a left tackle size, but I could be wrong. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong on that. But, they say big tackle with length, feel for the pocket, but inconsistent in the run game with his leverage, and his base will keep him out of a starting role. So I kind of see that, landing him on the practice squad. And when you talk about roster construction, right, the Bills only kept 4 tackles last year on the roster, which included obviously Tommy Doyle. And so I don't see the Bills. I don't see a path for him making the roster when they have Dawkins, they have Spencer Brown, they have Doyle, and they sign Quesenberry. I feel like they're not going to hang Dawkins out there as the only true vet, right? Because yes, Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle are technically vets now because they're going in their second years, but they're really young guys, and they're both from smaller schools who still need some coaching. So it would be a surprise to me if they opted for a guy like Tenuta over a Quesenberry or, God forbid, a Bobby Hart. I just don't see a path to the roster for him. So I'd pencil him in as practice squad for this year.
Kendall, talk about the value there. I mean, some names were popping up. Marquise Hayes, Lacita Smith, Donovan West, who went undrafted. He got a huge monetary deal too. He got one of the bigger bonuses you can get. Donovan West,
49ers, right?
Yeah, 49ers. So talk on it. What are your thoughts on the pick of Luke Tenuta?
I was upset that it wasn't a guard. The guards available were Lacita Smith, Chris Paul, or guys playing on the interior, I should say. Lacita Smith, Chris Paul, Thayer Munford, Marquise Hayes, Donovan West, and Alec Lindstrom. So there were plenty of options there, plenty of guys that I liked more than Tenuta. Ezzy was there too.
He got a huge
$20,000 had a good draft too.
$20,000,
right?
Yeah, $20,000 bonus from them. He just everything about as a scouting report just screamed Cromer guy, which is crazy.
Right.
So yeah, the line's cleaned up.
Yeah, in that regard, I wasn't thrilled. Seeing offensive tackle next to his name when he was drafted, I was like, what? Another? Why do we need this? We just signed Quesenberry. We drafted 2 last year. What is the point of this? But I did like his tape. It was solid. He really didn't do a lot of things wrong. He clearly is a coach's son. He understands blocking concepts, where to be. He's always at the right place at the right time. Solid technique. He definitely has room to improve in terms of his technique. But the thing that this screams to me is you're drafting a high floor guy versus, taking a stab at 2 high ceiling guys last year. So yeah, I think you're right, Tilt. I think it's tough to find a path to the roster for him, but I genuinely ask myself, what did they think of Tommy Doyle? Because he really only found a role replacing Tommy Sweeney. Do they really see a future for him at tackle? Do they think that upward trajectory or that mountain that he has to climb in terms of technique is just too steep for him? And did they want to match that athleticism of Spencer Brown with someone with more of just a high floor behind him? So that's kind of my question of, does Tenuta have a chance to beat Tommy Doyle to a roster spot? I genuinely don't know, but I was pleasantly surprised with the tape. I think he offers a high floor, and obviously pairing him with Cromer is interesting to try and work on getting his pad level lower. Obviously, naturally being 6'8", it is difficult to get that pad level lower, but you work with a great offensive line mind like Aaron Cromer, and hopefully you can mitigate some of those areas of opportunity.
Well, let me ask you this, because just really quick, because you mentioned Tommy Doyle. Who is the Bills' backup left tackle right now? It's Tommy Doyle, is it not? Like
I would say it's so I would say like in training camp practices it's probably going to be Tommy Doyle on the left or Bobby Hart on the left and Tommy Doyle on the right. But I think they're probably going to pick one spot for Tommy Doyle, and it seemed like they picked left. But started talking in circles here because I'm changing my mind as I go. But I think in a game, if Deion Dawkins went down, I think it would be David Quessenberry.
I think that's fair.
Who played snaps at left tackle for the Titans a couple of years ago. Like, I'm not saying he's perfect, but I would think it would be Quessenberry. Or I don't know if they want to do the Spencer Brown thing.
Yeah, or if like obviously you could just shuffle it and push one to the left.
Didn't work out so well with that. But that's why I say Tommy Doyle, like, I mean, maybe you're right, Kendall. Like, if Quessenberry truly is like gonna be the backup left tackle, like that's something Tommy Doyle can hang his hat on right now. Potentially, is like, hey, I can back up Deion Dawkins, and maybe no one else on this roster can. So it's very interesting. It'll be very interesting to see who lines up at left tackle and in the twos at camp.
Yeah, Elshar comes in and says, "Do you know why Lacia Smith fell so much in the draft? I was surprised by this. Like, for Lacia Smith's sake, and you could probably say this for a guy like Marquise Hayes as well. It's like very little versatility. Like, they're guards only. They're not going to play center. They're not going to play tackle. At the end of the day, they're kind of Jags. They're like just a guy. Like, we look at them in isolation in the 2022 draft, right? But in regards to the entire league, they're kind of just a guy. Like, the ceiling for a guy like Lacia Smith or a Marquise Hayes, it's probably not the highest. Like, you get them. You get them in like
could get a capable starter. Right? And could is the key.
And that's and then that's why it's like the 5th, 6th, 7th round that you get these guys in. Like, you're not pulling the trigger in the 3rd or 4th round for a guy like this. So seeing those guys drop, like, not surprising at all to me. The only thing that surprised me was Donovan West, just because of his flexibility as like a 3-position guy.
Yeah, that
is what shocked, and his age, 20 years old. Like, that's what shocked me. Maybe his age is what ended up dinging him the most at the end. Anyway, so the last pick here, Baylon Spector. I'm not going to lie to you. When I saw it come up on the TV, I was just like, I give up. I'm done trying to predict what it is that this team feels like they need. Brandon Beane like hinted at his press conference like that he thought like Baylon had a really good chance to make the team. It's like, you just took another weak side linebacker. Like, I know he played the middle at Clemson, but 6'1", 233. Decent dropping back into coverage. He's a closing speed guy. He communicates for that Clemson defense, played in some big games, high RAS score. So, he's going to be a decent special teamer. But like, I look at some of his weaknesses and people say it's like stacking and shedding, diagnosing plays. And I'm just like, cool. Like, what? Like, where this guy is going to be a special teamer. Like, and you just with other dudes on the board, just took a guy that you could have gotten a guy like this as a UDFA. Like, all the guys who were UDFAs and signed elsewhere, where I'm just like, how the hell were those guys available to take a guy like Baylon Spector? I'm just, at the end of the day, it's like a 7th round pick. You hate to do that, be like, oh, it's just a 7th round pick, but it's like that's the one pick where I'm like, all the other ones I can wrap my head around. This one, I'm out. Like, I don't get it. So what do you see as his short-term and long-term fit?
I mean, short-term, he may not even make the practice squad, right? And that's kind of where I'm coming out on him. And like, because you look at the Bills, all of a sudden have like a litany of linebackers, right? They drafted Bernard, obviously. They've got Tyrell Dodson. They've got Andre Smith. They've got Tyler Matakevich, Joe Giles Harris. They signed Markel Lee. Yeah. Now they have Baylon Spector in the mix. Like what's that? That's 9 linebackers now, all of a sudden, that you have that you're probably going to take into camp. And they've only kept 5, right, the past couple seasons. So 5 or 6 at the most. So I know if Chris was here in the chat, he'd tell me how many they had last year. It was either 5 or 6. But the fact of the matter is like, Bernard, you drafted him, and you're trying to find a path for him to playing time, and his path's going to be special teams probably to start out. Like, Baylon Spector is not going to make the team. Like, I just, I'll pencil that in too. Like, and I think he's going to have a hard time just making the practice squad. Last year, the Bills only had one linebacker on the practice squad. It was Joe Giles Harris. Like they had one linebacker on an expanded practice squad. Now I know that's going to fluctuate from year to year, but the fact, well, we lost Judge. I don't know where he went. I think he probably accidentally hit the leave studio button, but but the fact is, there he is. I don't know what I think, let's see what he said. Did you accidentally leave the studio?
Yeah, I have no idea how that just, like, I was scrolling my mouse around
Okay.
and it just accidentally clicked the leave studio button.
I was just saying he might not even make the practice squad, right? Like I just like, it's one of those like Austin Prohl type picks, it feels like to me, where it's like, okay, this guy played on a really good program in college and he was kind of a box score stuffer as a linebacker, which linebackers typically are for stats, but nothing crazy to me. He's a good kid, right? He has a master's degree and looks like he has a good head on his shoulder, but the classic Spector thing really, I think what it is, and Kendall's going to talk about, is like all these UDFAs, and like even some of the UDFAs we signed, I would have drafted in that.
I would have taken Weidemeyer over Spector. Like if you would have taken Weidemeyer with that last pick, I would have been like, this draft is great.
So
we still
I don't know,
UDFA,
man.
so I guess
Practice squad's up in the air, honestly.
You're Brandon Beane, and you're literally saying it's tough to get UDFAs because our roster is so deep. Bills Mafia, go tweet at some of these interior offensive linemen. Draft a fucking guard. How hard is it?
I know. That's what I'm so shocked we couldn't pick up an interior offensive lineman in the UDFA market, because yeah, sure. I mean, you look at, Cody Ford, he's a former second-round pick, and, Ike Bucker, he's been in the league for a while with some spot starts, and, like, yeah, sure, we have some depth with dudes that have started, but an interior offensive lineman, UDFA, has a chance to crack this roster. It's obviously an uphill battle, but it's an uphill battle for every UDFA, no matter where you go, and I think you kind of hopefully should balance the idea of hopefully having that uphill climb on a Super Bowl caliber roster.
All right, gentlemen, we got 200 people in here. We're hour 46 in. This is amazing. Smash that like button if you're in here. Like it says at the bottom ticker, when all these guys the Bills have drafted and signed goes away towards the end. If you're a fan of this show, invite other people to come join the party here at the Air Raid Hour every Monday, Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And it's time to get into it's time to get into the nitty gritty of it, right? It's time to get into the UDFAs. I'm going to start with the big one. I think the most exciting one is Jalen Weidemeyer of Texas A&M. The Bills were, brought him in for a top 30 visit. They brought Isaiah Spiller in for a top 30 visit. We talked about Kenyon Green a ton. So the name Jalen Weidemeyer has been talked about. Third-year sophomore, 6'4", 255 pounds. He's got good size, got good hands, good catch radius. He's got some mismatch potential. I think he's the one UDFA who could make this roster as TE3 right away. Obviously, horrible RAS, horrible testing. There are some other parts of his game he can work on. But Kendall, I know you've had a chance to go out and really do some film watching on Jalen Weidemeyer. So speak to Weidemeyer a little bit here.
Yeah, I think the first thing that should be mentioned is that he plays better than his RAS score suggests. I think that's the first thing that needs to be mentioned, because that score is so bad and it has off-put people. It has literally told people, I want nothing to do with this guy. That being said, there are moments on tape when it comes into play and it truly does hinder him. There are moments when he can't hold blocks because his foot quickness isn't, getting in front of that man and being able to seal that man off from the run gap. Or I literally saw him as a puller once where he didn't pull fast enough and the running back tripped over his ankles because he couldn't get out of the run gap fast enough. I've seen him just not get out of his break fast enough on routes to catch a football. But then I've also seen like one-handed catches. I've seen like nuanced route running. I've seen him pull double moves. I've seen him pull some sharp like stick routes, some sharp out routes. I've seen a lot of good. He has a really good head on his shoulders in terms of like what his assignment is in the run game and run blocking. Like sometimes the execution isn't always there, but I think there is something there with this guy. And like you said, you draft this guy in the 7th round, and I love this draft, but getting him in the UDFA market, like honestly, it makes it even better. It really does, because you get that stab at Baylon Spector, who may not have signed here otherwise. Like, sure, we just talked about how he probably doesn't have an easy shot to make this roster or even the practice squad. But who's to say he would even want to come here if he wasn't forced to, because he doesn't have the best chance to make the roster. So perhaps this was the best move. really, though, end of the day, with Jalen Weidermeyer, massive production. Tilt, you talked about it in terms of looking back. Ed Oliver, top 10 blue chipper, then the next year he falls out. You know, Kaiir Elam, top 15 blue chipper, next year he falls out. Greg Rousseau, top 10 blue. Same trend. Jalen Weidermeyer was talked about as T1 for whatever reason, testing or tape, whatever it was. He fell out of that range as T1 as the year progressed. I think the name of the game for him is going to be consistency. If he can find consistency, he'll be fine. And I think the bar for him to make this roster is a low bar to clear, considering Tommy Doyle took Tommy Sweeney's spot at the tail end of the year. I really think the bar for Weidermeyer to make this roster is low. That being said, we need to see how that athleticism fares out at the NFL level in the preseason circuit. Because, I mean, obviously, you know, I see it against college athletes in the SEC, but you want to see it against NFL athletes.
And here's how I know that this is how I know that NFL, or at least how draft scouts, maybe not NFL scouts, but draft scouts don't only look at tape, right? And tape being such an important factor. Like TDN had Jalen Weidermeyer in mid-February as their TE2. Their 57th rated overall prospect in the entire class of any player. As soon as his testing came in, they dropped him down into like the 200s. So like his production of 35, 40, 45 catches 3 years in a row and his 16 touchdowns or however many he had didn't just go away. Like he had already played those games, right? Yeah. Those games didn't change. So you have him as the TE2, and then all of a sudden he tests poorly and he drops down in the 200s. So that's why I'm saying, like, and to your point, Kendall, like the path to the roster for him to be TE3 is there, right? There is a path for him here to make this team. And the top 30 visit, obviously the Bills were familiar enough with him. It's just a little odd to me, again, that they had a top 30 visit with him and they chose to pick a line, like actually draft a linebacker over a guy they had a top 30 visit with, and then sign him as a UDFA. Like they clearly had interest in him. So sometimes I wonder about the thought process that goes into like the decision making around like why you draft the guy versus then hoping to get him as a UDFA. But maybe they thought, I don't know. Here's like a really roundabout way to think about it. Like maybe they thought like this was one particular situation where they thought a UDFA would be attracted to come to their situation, knowing they had a meeting with him and knowing that there might be a path for him to make the team. They felt like, okay, rather than that, we'll draft a guy that maybe won't, even though I still don't think Baylon Spector's going to make the team.
I mean, I look at Jalen Weidermeyer too. His numbers were pretty consistent his 3 years at Texas A&M. Always had between like 4 and 6 touchdowns, between 450, 500 some odd yards, between, 40 and 50 catches. And then I look at I'm just looking at this is just strictly box scores, but against some of his biggest opponents, against Chance Campbell and Ole Miss, 5 for 68. I mean, that's a game where 2 linebackers from Ole Miss were drafted this year. Against Auburn, 5 for 53. Against Alabama, 3 for 73. So he had some decent stat lines against some of his best competition in the SEC this year. So I think a guy like I'm ready to pencil Jalen Weidermeyer in as tight end 3. No offense to Tommy Sweeney, but I'm just I'm at my wit's end with a guy that I had high hopes for.
I don't hate that. I mean,
when he was drafted.
I want to address something in the chat. I see a lot of people talking about like potentially moving him to interior offense, or not interior, moving him into offensive line or doing something like he's not like that. And I've also seen people say like he's not a good blocker. He's just middling in a lot of ways. He's a very well-rounded player, but he's middling in a lot of ways, and he needs to find consistency. I'd say he's sufficient in a lot of areas, and maybe there are some areas where he's just mediocre or adequate, but I think he has room to improve. He really just needs to find consistency with it. I wouldn't say he's a bad blocker or a bad receiver. He's just sufficient all the way around.
I'm really excited about the 3 offensive linemen that the Buffalo Bills have nabbed thus far in the UDFA market. And the funny thing is I never heard of any of the 3 until I did some digging. So it just goes to show you just like the amount of offensive linemen that were available in this draft was pretty crazy. But Derek Kerstetter, 6'5", 305, very similar to the size that Ryan Bates was coming out of Penn State. And one of the things that's noted about Derek Kerstetter from Texas, positional versatility, good footwork, good at the second level. So a relatively decent athlete. He needs to get stronger. So obviously maybe a year on the practice squad, a year in the strength room, things like that. A guy like Derek Kerstetter could end up being a quality backup for the Buffalo Bills. Another guy with very similar size, Alec Anderson, who was throwing his friends through tables. There's the picture of him rubbing his belly. A guy that's really sort of already endeared himself to Bills Mafia. Very similar size as well. 6'5", 305. The Bills saw a lot of him because they brought in Sean Ryan for a top 30 visit. He's played under Chip Kelly in that semi-pro style offense. He's played right tackle. He's played guard, so he can move around a little bit. He's blocked for a UCLA team that Zach Charbonnet. Before that, Joshua Kelly. So the guy's blocked for some decent runners and DTR's put up some decent stats there at UCLA with a relatively pro style offense there. So really looking forward to that. And then last but not least, Tanner Owen from Northwest Missouri State. This is a guy who's probably 2-3 years away from relevancy, but 6'5", 295 pounds. Draft Diamonds posting that video of him running wide receiver routes. So the three guys that we got, I don't think any of them are rosterable players right now, but projecting them into the future, I really like all three guys, projecting them into the future as possibly sticking on the practice squad and carving out a chance to compete for a job in year 2. So really excited for I think they found some really good gems on the interior of the offensive line. Anyone have any thoughts on any of the other UDFAs? Anyone got anything? I didn't even look into the wide receivers, to be honest. I know the one guy's got
receivers a little bit.
Williams has got kick return flicks, right?
He does from App State. Keith Corbin is an older guy. He was a transfer, I believe, from Houston.
Turns out he's only a camp invite, so it was not a UDFA offer. So he's not even a signee, apparently. It's just Williams and Powau from BYU, the bigger guy.
Yeah, Powau is 6'4". His
Heavier
RAS
too,
was
I
only 5, but his production was okay, right? He had 45 receptions back-to-back seasons, but he's a stride. He looked like a strider to me I watched a couple clips, some BYU games.
Trayvon Fuller from Tulsa, he transferred from somewhere too. I can't remember where he transferred
Blackshear is interesting to me. Transfer from Rutgers. He left Rutgers when they were going through the head coaching regime change, but this is a guy who had 44 catch season at Rutgers before he transferred. Has over 400 career rushes, 123 career receptions, 1,200 receiving yards. Does have good kick return experience, almost 40 kick returns in his career and a few punt returns. So I really liked, I like Blackshear. I watched, a couple of VTech games this year, obviously being an ACC guy. I think he was shifty, right? He reminded me of a thinner Bam Knight, in my opinion, a guy that I liked at NC State, maybe a more slender Bam Knight. But I liked his vision. I thought he had pretty decent vision, but it's going to be hard for him to make the team. I think he's a great practice squad type running back, but I don't think he's going to make the team.
The one that I looked a little bit into, I looked into those two offensive linemen, not the Northwestern one, but Syracuse defensive lineman Kingsley Jonathan. I don't think he was officially signed, but he was invited to the rookie minicamp, I think.
I think he's officially signed.
9.
Oh, he is?
Nine,
Okay.
9 RAS. He had a pretty
good so that was the thing. He has a good RAS. He shows some of that athleticism at times. He's kind of short, but he's got long arms. He's I guess a little undersized for the archetype, but it's nothing crazy too far off. You could add some weight, obviously, if things pan out. I think the biggest thing with him is translating his fit to the Buffalo Bills because he played on a 3-man front where he was lining up as a 4-eye. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense for the Buffalo Bills defense. So it's kind of going to be, what is that learning curve for him? But the athleticism is there. So you're just kind of trying to see how he fits in and then how to make that skill set fit when you're lining up on the inside shoulder of the tackle versus lining up on the outside shoulder of the tackle, trying to get around that edge, or maybe bait going around that edge and then slanting inside. So I think he's an interesting one. Probably a practice squad guy at the end of the day if he's going to make this team in any way. But I think he's interesting because he has the athletics upside to grow into more than what he currently is.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Prince Emili from Penn. Is an interesting one. Too. 6'2", 300. He was so with these guys, first of all, he went to Penn. He's currently enrolled at Wharton Business School, which is one of the top business schools in the country. Super smart guy. All academic teams so not only are you in the Ivy League, you're all academic within the Ivy League system.
Yeah.
So I think that speaks probably to his character there. But 6'2", 300. Maybe the Buffalo Bills feel like they can get him in here. They can bulk him up even more because even for 300 pounds, he looks a little thin in some of the photographs I've seen. Bulk him up even more, get him even stronger, get him even more experienced. What's the number one thing about small scores that you want to see? Dominates competition.
Yep.
Twice first team all Ivy League, 2019 and 2021. They didn't play in 2020 because of COVID. 13 tackles for loss this last season, which was second in the Ivy League. 5 sacks, a blocked kick. So you'd like to see them dominate competition. It looks like he was relatively dominant
EJ Perry
in the Ivy League. So I don't know. I'd have to look that one up, but I do know that he it looks like he, for the most part, dominated Ivy League competition. So I'm kind of and it said one profile listed him at 285. His Penn website lists him at 6'2", 300. So maybe that was from a high school recruitment page, etc. Hard to find information, but who knows? Maybe that was from a pro day. So I don't know. I have 300 pounds here from his Penn website. So I'm kind of excited to get him in. I can't wait till you get the first interview with him. He seems like an interesting guy. So I'd love to get to know him. Wait for one of the beat reporters to do a little piece on him. That should be fun.
So if Corbin isn't officially signed, that means what? We have 6 open roster spots then?
Yeah, let me go double. Well, because
I guess 5. No,
Tanner Owen.
Yeah, so we should have 5 then, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we got 5 spots. Joe Hayden. I hear someone in the comment section, I can't look into it too much, but someone in the comment section said Akeem Hicks and Melvin Ingram were zeroing in on the Dolphins. Like, fuck, if that's true. But yeah, who knows what we're going to do with that? Maybe a camp arm quarterback. Who knows? There's still some time. Maybe the Bills that want to see some of these mini camp guys that get brought in. The Buff State long snapper, the UB corner whose name I'm blanking on. There was a couple other guys that I saw were invited. So yeah. So Chris Jenke says we got 4 spots. So I don't know.
Chris.
Yeah, I trust Chris. So we'll go 4. They got 4 spots. So it should be interesting to see where the Bills go from here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have just passed the 2-hour mark. We still got 194 of you here. So it's tough to walk away from a comment section as awesome as this. But actually, you know what, gentlemen? 2023 mock draft simulator. Want to do it?
I couldn't even tell you who would be the number 1 overall.
So Will Anderson. Come on now. Will Anderson, Bryce Young.
I was going to say it's probably Bryce Young just because, everyone's going to be quarterback needy next year.
Yeah. So it should be interesting. Like I said, tough to walk away from 190. You guys are absolutely incredible. You definitely make the show what this is. The reason why it's easy to go 2 hours is because we got you guys, keeping us motivated and keeping us engaged the entire way. So thank you guys so much. Smash that like on your way out. If you know someone who would enjoy joining us or watching on demand, please share. Word of mouth is 100% the number one way. We want the word of this show to spread. But if you want to smash the like and help the algorithm, that would be great too. Leave a comment in the comment section if you're listening on demand. That also helps with the algorithm. And plus, we want to communicate with you just because you can't watch live. If you have a comment or a question, etc., throw it in the comment section and we'll try to get to it over the course of the week. We will be back on Thursday. If you listen on Apple or Spotify, leave a review, etc. 5-star. We always appreciate that as well. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reconstructing the offense and the defense over the next 2 shows. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Are we having fun yet?